Hello and welcome to episode 14 of History's Greatest Idiots, the podcast in which we take you back on a journey through the annals of history and show you the worst mistakes ever made by humans so that you can earn lessons from them and never repeat those mistakes again. But who are we kidding? We're humans. We love making mistakes. They're kind of fun and they teach us a lot. So, nothing wrong with that. Joining me as ever is my amazing, wonderful co-host, Derek. Derek, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic again,
Great.
as always.
Excellent. I'm just realised that we haven't done our usual intro thing, but it's fine. I'll fix it up in post. Don't worry. I've already started the video, so I'm not going to stop.
Reality, internet, podcast, video.
I've got the Sunday brain thing going on. Just nothing's making sense. So how are things over in Arizona right now? How are things going at your end?
Pretty good, man.
Yeah.
Just I've been on vacation, hanging out, playing radio every now and again. Morning radio in Tucson with my buddy Beef. It's super fun. I'm just happy to, I don't know, be doing stuff. Guess that's not work, real work.
I get that. Like doing something that kind of you have a passion for or like gets you excited. Like I love doing stuff like that. I love doing voiceover work and streaming and all the other things I do that kind of keep my creative juices flowing while still challenging you. What are mornings like in Tucson? I have to ask because I've never been to Arizona. I know of Tucson, but what's it like kind of morning radio time?
He's doing it different because he's bringing back like personality to music radio, which they've like kind of gone away from in the States. They think that they can program the music in and get the ratings that way.
That doesn't work.
In reality, Spotify and YouTube Music and
the only difference between radio and Spotify is literally the person putting the music out, so you do need to have a connection there. So I'm glad that he's doing that. It's a good decision.
He's got a cast of characters too, so it's like there's 11 different people that rotate through each day throughout the week, and
that's amazing.
It's nuts.
That's really cool. It's funny because I remember back in my radio days a long time ago. God, I'm so old. I went to a speech done. Oh God, who was it that did it? It was a very famous American voiceover artist, and he'd come over to be one of the guest speakers at this conference. And this is going to show my age. The only difference between you and an iPod, your show and an iPod, is your personality. Make it count. Even if you only get 2 minutes of talk time an hour, make those 2 minutes count. And I was only allowed 2 minutes of talk time an hour, but I stole 3 more. So like, it was like, I'm not going to play this Smith song. I'm going to talk a little bit more. So, and it works. You know, the ratings always tend to go up when you have a connection with your audience and you interact with them. So, and that's what we hope to do on this show. So if you are listening, we are on Instagram and Twitter. I think on Twitter it's at History's Greatest Idiots, and or is it Greatest Idiots? It's at Greatest Idiots on Twitter, and on Instagram it's at History's Greatest Idiots. So if you want to interact with us there, please do. We've already had another podcast called History Obscura podcast sent us last time. The person I researched, Tycho Brahe, who is a fascinating scientist, genius level intellect, discovered incredible things, but refused to acknowledge that the Earth revolved around the sun, and also died because he held in his piss too long. So that's fascinating idiot.
That is not the way you want to go.
That is not. No, I think peaceful. You don't want to die like an idiot. I mean, you can live your life as an idiot, but if you go out like either heroically or normally, that's kind of, you know, like, oh, passed away peacefully in their sleep. It's like, oh, okay, nice. Or passed away fighting, invading hordes from such and such. You know, that has a ring to it. That's the whole thing. But if you die because you held your piss in, because you didn't know what the etiquette was for leaving a table at a banquet, then you're a fucking idiot.
For sure.
Absolutely. So on that subject, Derek, who is your chosen idiot for episode 14 this week? Who have you got for us?
I have got a big one this time.
Awesome.
I wanted to go a ways back, and I've been eyeing this man's mustache with envy for for quite some time.
Awesome.
The guy I have today was born in Berlin in January of 1859.
Okay.
Usually I'll tease it along and make you keep guessing at who it is. This time I'm not going to do it because it's super obvious. But he was born in 1859 at the Crown Prince's Palace to Victoria, the Princess Royal, the eldest daughter of Britain's Queen Victoria, and Prince Frederick William, future King Frederick III of Prussia.
That's right, yes.
He ended up being the last emperor and king of Prussia, reigning from June 15th, 1888 until his abdication on November 9th, 1918. The one and only Kaiser Wilhelm II.
This dude. Holy shit.
It's odd. I didn't know this, but he suffered a traumatic breech birth resulting in Erb's palsy, which left him with a withered left arm that was about 6 inches shorter than his right.
I do remember hearing about the arm. I didn't know it was from a breech birth. That's interesting.
It was a rough way to come in.
Yeah. Probably gave him a complex early on as well, I'd imagine.
There's a lot of historians that think that the shorter right arm and having to hide it and conceal it and being in a position of leadership or like royalty, you don't want that sort of stuff to get out. So it did have a bit of an effect, or they have suggested that it had an effect on his emotional development and personality and psyche over time.
Yeah.
In 1863, an example of the developmental issues, he went to England to be present at the wedding of his uncle, King Edward the VII.
Okay, sure, that sounds right. Yeah, because I think Bertie was the 8th.
Yep.
Maybe.
Nope. Yeah. Then that's the one, Bertie.
Yes.
He went to go to that between the King Edward and Princess Alexander of Denmark.
Yes. So that would have been Bertie's dad.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I am, for a person that does a history podcast, shockingly bad.
There's a lot of kings and queens. Don't be upset about mixing them up. They're just one homogenized, incestuous lump, as far as I'm concerned.
So many. I had no idea that they were so tightly linked between like Germany and Prussia and
England,
Great Britain.
Yeah.
It's basically should all just be one country, I suppose.
More or less, it would make sense, wouldn't it?
Like a European
union of sorts.
Anyway, so he's at this wedding, 4 years old, and his uncle was put in charge of him, try to keep him in check.
Okay.
And he was dressed in a Highland costume for the ceremony, complete with a small toy dirk.
Okay.
And he was raising all kinds of hell. Right. And his uncle, Prince Alfred, told him, hey, knock it the hell off. Calm down.
Slap.
So he drew his dirk and threatened his life.
4-year-old.
And that's when Prince Alfred subdued him with force, and Wilhelm bit him on the leg like a little shit.
Little shit. Oh my God. Problem child from the start. Yeah, that's when you get in that from a 4-year-old. That's it.
Yeah,
immediate
threatening
issues.
your life. Woo!
Yeah. That's pretty bad. Holy shit.
Luckily, his grandmother didn't know about that, and he remained her favorite grandchild.
Okay.
His great uncle was the King of Prussia, Frederick William the Fourth, who reigned from 1840. I didn't stop working here. He reigned from 1840 and was left permanently incapacitated after a series of strokes. Ooh. So his younger brother Wilhelm the First acted as his regent.
Right.
Later becoming king when his brother died in 1861, which set up the path for Wilhelm II to come on in. When his uncle Kaiser Wilhelm I died in Berlin on March 9th, 1888, Prince Wilhelm's father took the throne as Frederick III.
Right, yeah.
at that time, he's already suffering from incurable throat cancer and spent all of 99 days reigning while fighting the disease.
That's terrible. God, this lineage has had quite the ride. You know, you think that over in the UK, we've had the Queen on the throne for what feels like 150 fucking years, but this lot have gone through kings like they were managers of a sports franchise, for Christ's sake.
It feels like the more and more that I read and learn, it wasn't uncommon for really short reigns, apparently.
Particularly around this time. There's a lot of horrible diseases going on.
Well, and a lot of horrible people.
Yeah. There's that.
So, huh?
There's that, yeah.
Maybe this guy, too.
Oh, yeah.
So, in 1888, Frederick kicked the bucket, and boom, Wilhelm II becomes German emperor and king of Prussia. Mm-hmm. He had a turbulent reign that culminated in Germany's guarantee of military support to Austria-Hungary during the crisis in July of 1914, which was one of the direct underlying causes of World War I. So
yeah, there were a few things going. World War I is a much more complicated sequence of events than World War II. World War II is reasonably clear-cut. I mean, yes, you can argue about when it started. Did it start when Japan invaded China and all these different things? But with World War I, there's a whole big, long snowballing of history that you can go back hundreds of years, particularly with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the irony, of course, is that had Franz Ferdinand not been assassinated by the anarchists, he was probably one of the few people that could have sorted out the issues in the Balkans, because he was a central figure. He was very unpartisan, so he was quite a moderator and decent person. But unfortunately, he was shot, and it just all snowballed from there. That was the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back with World War I.
Yeah, the whole World War I beginning was a total shit show all the way around.
Oh yeah.
Making any sort of sense of it is, I'm like, I don't know who started as the bad guy.
Yeah.
I know the Black Hand sounds pretty badass, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, to get a better picture of Kaiser Wilhelm, you have to understand that he was an incredibly complicated individual, just like the war.
Yes.
His parents, Emperor Frederick III and Empress Victoria, were politically liberal, and he rejected their politics, preferring his grandfather's reactionary views. His mother was Queen Victoria's eldest daughter.
That's right.
And he prided himself on being Queen Victoria's favorite grandson.
Yeah.
As I understand it, they were really close, and she actually died in his arms.
Wow. That's amazing.
So his attitude towards the UK was influenced by that relationship, but it oscillated between sentimental friendship and jealous hostility.
Yeah, he did have a jealous streak, the Kaiser, and it's a little bit. Like you say, he was a very complex character. I do feel an element of sympathy for him because of some of the aspects of his life, kind of growing up and the pressures and stuff like that. However, his reaction to them it's typical of someone who has had a difficult upbringing to embrace radical political beliefs that are, and when you have that power and you embrace those beliefs, that's a recipe for catastrophe, as we find out. Tens of millions of people died.
And there was kind of a fragile, weird balance with the German government at the time. And the Kaiser had a convoluted emotional situation because he had an unrealistic appreciation for the position that he actually held. Because of the complex hybrid system, there was no one ruler, but Kaiser Wilhelm believed that he ruled alone by divine right.
Oh, God.
And that kind of was a problem.
Yeah.
He actually once said, "I am the sole master of German policy, and my country must follow where I go," which didn't really correspond to reality.
Yeah.
And it kind of got him into conflict with one of the leaders of the German government, like the Iron Chancellor.
Yeah, he kind of, as an emperor, he kind of came about 500 years too late. Like, if he'd been wielding that kind of thing, you know, in the 1400s or whatever, then that would have been fine. It's like, yes, my will is the only one that matters. I am divinely appointed. Like, that shit had been going on for hundreds of years at that point, and people were like, yeah, he probably is divinely appointed. Everybody else says they have been, so why don't we just believe him? But when you've got people in power in a democratic society, which Germany was, it was transitioning. It's interesting in terms of like the actual process. German politics and life went from like serfs and feudalism to democracy very quickly. Like, there was no transition period. It was just like one to the other. Whereas most countries would have had civil wars and would have had maybe a republic or maybe like parliamentary democracy first. They just went boom, serfs, boom, you're all free, but you're still working for us. So it's like, it's weird.
Kind of jarring, and you kind of figure when you're used to being ruled, when your rulers are like, hey, what do you think? You're like, think you should do your job.
Yeah. You're divinely appointed. Why are you asking me?
Right? So he got into it a little bit with the Iron Chancellor, though, believing that he was divinely appointed, and everybody else saying, well, that's not how it works anymore. We're changing that.
Yeah.
He initially was a real big admirer of Otto von Bismarck, but his impatience, the Kaiser, Mr. Wilhelm, was super impatient, and it brought him into conflict with the Iron Chancellor a lot because he opposed Bismarck's careful foreign policy and preferred the vigorous, rapid expansion to protect Germany's place in the sun.
Yeah.
And decided, we wanted a big navy, wanted to challenge Britain on the naval power so they could keep their place in the sun.
It's funny, because he was going up against the Iron Chancellor. For people who don't know, Otto von Bismarck was possibly the greatest politician, certainly one of the most successful politicians in German history. Like, he was a genius in the fields of foreign affairs, in rebuilding countries, in managing political outcomes and stuff. He was brilliant, and for the emperor to get involved in that, it's like, leave the dude to do his job. He's very good. So
I kind of wonder what would happen if some of the really good leaders and really good politicians hadn't like ate themselves to death or been run out by crazy bastards
or assassinated by the CIA from a grassy knoll.
Right. What would the world look like today?
God knows.
Anyway, Bismarck resigned at Wilhelm's insistence in 1890 at the age of 75.
Jesus.
And and then Kaiser went on his way doing his thing, which wasn't all bad.
No, it's got to be said.
He enthusiastically promoted the arts and sciences as well as public education and social welfare. So there's those good things. He actually sponsored the Kaiser Wilhelm Society for the promotion of scientific research, which was funded by wealthy private donors, and state, which comprised a number of research institutes, both in pure and applied sciences.
Awesome.
That said, he had a limited attention span, which I think is horrible for science and art.
Yeah.
But he preferred to talk rather than listen. And as a result, was a really shitty judge of character for men, and had well, men and women, I suppose. Men being
particularly in German society. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So he had a super difficult time understanding the views of others because he never shut the hell up to listen to them talk. He was too busy thinking of what he was going to say. And you combine that with his impatientness and subjective reactions.
Yeah.
It kind of got bad, and he was super impulsive. So he was personally completely ill-equipped to guide Germany in foreign policy, and running off of Otto von Bismarck was really stupid.
Yeah, it really was a bad decision.
Some of his best friends, Count von Bülow and Prince von Eulenburg. Nice.
That was great. Well done.
They were quoted as saying, "It's a misfortune that our beloved and highly gifted Kaiser so readily exaggerates his temperament and Excuse me. Let me try this again.
Okay.
It is a misfortune that our beloved, highly gifted Kaiser so readily exaggerates, and his temperament and occasionally his imagination take over. So
that's a very good if you were to sum up the Kaiser without using swear words, that's a pretty good assessment of the man.
Yeah.
That's very good.
Thinks too much of
Pretty
himself.
much, yeah.
Makes stuff up.
Yeah.
So, as Bülow and Eulenberg were among the most loyal of the Kaiser's entourage, their remarks are kind of super telling, like you said. They also said he was too fond of words like smash, destroy, annihilate.
The fucking Hulk over here.
So, he was too fond of those words for his own country's good. British public opinion of him was quite favorable.
Yeah, it was, surprisingly.
Up until the late 1890s. Right about that time, that's when he forced Otto von Bismarck out. So
yeah,
I guess maybe they weren't super fond of him. They just liked the way that he let the dude that knew what he was doing do what he was doing.
Yeah. I think it's funny because around about the turn of the century, nationalism was starting to creep in, and at the time people were like, ooh, we remember Napoleon. Nationalism isn't good. Nationalism isn't good at all. Then 40 years later they're like, ooh, let's have some of that nationalism. Ooh, let's fight over it. Yes.
Well, another time when he was actually good, and I don't believe it was too much. It was away from the nationalisms in the 1900s when he supported the marriage of the Archduke Ferdinand to the Austria to the Countess Sophie Chotek.
Something like that. Yeah, it's a weird name.
But before too long, blows to his public opinions and trust came wandering in when the Eulenberg scandal hit. His friend and close member of his entourage was kind of outed by a member of the elite society and journalist Maximilian Harden, who published a bunch of revelations of homosexual activity involving the ministers, courtiers, army officers, and one Prince Philip zu Eulenberg, and that resulted in a ton of scandals, trials, and even suicides.
Yep, that was because it was still illegal in Germany right the way through until I think the 1960s, which it also was in the UK. Oscar Wilde was made to do hard labour for being gay.
Holy moly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They found out, like, oh, you're gay? The person who's been so flamboyant and dandy for 20 years of his career? Really? It's like the whole Freddie Mercury thing, or I guess the only one that was surprising was Rock Hudson because he was so kind of... But when people were surprised that Liberace was gay,
Oh.
Like, really? Liberace? Yes, of course, Liberace, for fuck's sake.
What do you mean RuPaul dresses like a woman?
He's totally straight.
Well,
so yeah,
I had no idea how rough it was.
Oh yeah, big time.
I mean, I'm learning more and more, but it not too long after that stuff started going down. My stomach's growling all over the place. I think it's time to eat. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was a friend of the Kaiser, happened shortly after the scandals and trials and all of that. And the Kaiser was profoundly shocked by the assassination and offered to support Austria-Hungary in crushing the Black Hand, which was that secret organization of, I believe, the Serbs. Serbian?
Yes, the kind of the underground, basically.
Coolest secret society name of all time.
Yeah, along with the Hellfire Club, which was an actual real thing in the UK. I can't remember where it was, but what's his name? American kind of politician and inventor and founding father. Sorry?
Oh, Ben Franklin.
Franklin was a member of the Hellfire Club, and it was basically an underground orgy society. So,
nice.
Yeah, hell of a name as well. But, Franklin was a member because, he liked to pork. What can we say?
I don't know if the Black Hand was doing too much porking.
No, they were too busy killing. The Hellfire Club were
Yeah.
all about the shagging. So
See,
basically,
that's the club you need to get into.
yeah,
You need to be the
avoid the
shagging club and not the
murdering, secret underground sex in spa towns. That's more fun than assassinating emperors, you know.
because that turns to things like Wilhelm sanctioning the use of force by Austria against the perceived source of the movement in Serbia.
Yep.
Unknown to the emperor at the time, the Austro-Hungarian ministers and generals had already convinced Franz Joseph I of Austria to sign a declaration of war against Serbia.
That's right.
And as a direct result, Russia started to mobilize and attack Austria in defense of Serbia, and here comes war.
Yeah. And then everyone piles in.
So, yeah, during the First World War, he became a central target of the British anti-German propaganda and the personification of hated enemy. Yeah, he's a good target. During the war, he was also regarded as the Shadow Kaiser because even though he was the supreme warlord whose name the generals acted in, most of the generals totally disregarded everything that he was saying and kind of just did whatever the hell they wanted.
Yeah, because they knew they were professional soldiers. He's just a hothead, basically.
With one short arm and a tendency to exaggerate.
Exactly.
So his war in the wartime was one of ever-decreasing power, and he increasingly handled award ceremonies and honorific duties.
Yeah.
The high command continued with their strategy, even though it was clear that the Schlieffen plan had failed. But by 1916, I scrolled too far. The empire had effectively become a military dictatorship under the control of Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg.
Yes, the von Hindenburg name is very famous throughout history. So, yeah, big arsehole, that guy.
Yeah, him and his friend Erich Ludendorff were the ones running things during the war. The Kaiser's support collapsed completely between October and November of 1918 in the army and in the civilian government and in the German public opinion. And then President Woodrow Wilson made it clear that the Kaiser could no longer be party to peace negotiations when the war was ending.
Yeah.
And Wilhelm was at the Imperial Army headquarters in Spa, Belgium, when the uprisings in Berlin and other cities took him by surprise in late 1918. Mutiny among the ranks of his beloved Kaiser-like Marines and Imperial Navy totally blew his mind after the outbreak of the German Revolution.
Yes.
And he kind of sat there trying to figure out, oh shit, should I abdicate or not? Should I get out of here? Should I cut weight and take off?
Yeah.
And the Chancellor, Prince Max Baden, made that pretty easy for him when he said, oh yeah, he abdicated both of his titles. He's out. So Wilhelm crossed the border by train and went into exile in Netherlands.
Which was actually a very smart thing to do, to be quite honest, because there was no way he would have been killed had he gone back to Germany.
He wanted to try and keep a crown, and that's totally not something to risk your life over.
No, it really isn't.
One of my titles.
Just go and chill out in fucking Amsterdam, you idiot. Jesus.
Yeah, there's worse places to be exiled. I tell you
there are. Yeah, if you know Amsterdam, that's a nice place to be exiled.
Upon the conclusion of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, Article 227 expressly provided for the prosecution of Wilhelm for, quote, a supreme offense against the international morality and the sanctity of treaties.
Insane. Also, the Versailles thing, what a fucking clusterfuck. Without the Treaty of Versailles, if they'd got that right, there's no World War II.
Right.
Basically.
That whole thing was a shit show.
Yeah.
Also, most of what they were doing back then was just a giant problem.
Idiots everywhere.
Just not thinking through what comes of these actions. They're thinking, well, this is mine, that's yours. We can have some of this. Kill that guy.
Yeah. Empire building always works out great, doesn't it? Nothing ever goes wrong.
Never. Never. Anyway, the Dutch government didn't extradite him. They refused to do so, despite the Allies telling him, yeah, give him to us, give him to us. King George, he... Yeah. He once looked at his cousin, or wait, he wrote that he looked on his cousin as the greatest criminal in history, but opposed the proposal to hang the Kaiser.
Jesus.
So he's my cousin. He's a dick. We're not going to kill him.
No. He's the greatest criminal in history, but don't kill him. You know?
Yeah.
Kill other criminals that have nicked fruit from market stalls and stuff. You know, they're the ones that really deserve it, not this guy who's sanctioned the death of millions of people.
So. I guess it's always been a thing. If you're born into the right family, crime's kind of subjective.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was reported that... oh, wait. See, it's real. On January 1st, 1920, it was stated in official circles in London that Great Britain would welcome the refusal by Holland to deliver the former Kaiser for trial, and it was hinted that this had been conveyed to the Dutch government through diplomatic channels.
Sure.
In 1922, Wilhelm published the first volume of his memoirs, which were a slim volume, and insisted that he wasn't guilty of the Great War or initiating the Great War, and defended his conduct throughout his reign, especially in matters of foreign policy. Dumbass.
Yeah.
I didn't do it. I was awesome. Me. You don't know.
I mean,
I don't know. I was awesome.
I can kind of understand, like, he to a certain extent, he is right. Like, he wasn't ultimately responsible for the outbreak of the war. That is true. But to then go on and say, also, I was fucking amazing. You should all be glad. It's like, no. You had a point. Stop there. You know?
Close.
Yeah.
In the early 1930s, he apparently hoped that the successes by the German Nazi Party would stimulate interest in the restoration of the monarchy, and that his eldest grandson would get to become the fourth Kaiser. Because I think he's delusional and didn't have any idea what the German Nazi Party was up to.
Yeah. They'll give me power. They love sharing power, the Nazis. My God.
Yeah. Well, his second wife, Hermione, actively petitioned the Nazi government on her husband's behalf.
Yeah.
But Adolf Hitler himself was a veteran of World War I, and like other leading Nazis, felt nothing but contempt for the man they blamed for Germany's greatest defeat.
Exactly.
And his wife's petitions were ignored. And that just kind of further illustrates the delusional and unrealistic ideas that basically defined the life and leadership of Kaiser Wilhelm II, who was the last German emperor, king of Prussia, and one of history's greatest idiots. What do you think?
I absolutely agree with you. It's interesting because this is another instance of a very famous leader from history who's really only known for being, I mean, he did, like you say, he did stuff with the arts, with sciences, and, you know, the movements in that direction. But he's really only known for unrealized potential. You know, we look at someone like King John, or, you know, Bertie's brother who abdicated the throne, who we've covered before on this show, David. You know, these are all people who could have been good rulers, could have been good leaders, but they got in their own way, and they let, you know, they got on the wrong track, and they got on the wrong plane of thought. So a lot of it is kind of sad, because in terms of apportioning blame for the Kaiser's just horrific historic level fuck-ups, some of it does have to go to his upbringing, but then again, he did have a massively like, he was born into privilege, so we can't go too much into, he had a physical disability and he was bullied and blah, blah. It's like he lived in lavish luxury in Germany and Prussia, so, you know, his lot was not as bad as the peasants that were, you know, working the fields in those parts of the world.
It's a bit easier to survive with a disability when you're filthy rich.
Yeah, exactly. When you have multiple palaces to hide in, it's totally fine. The Kaiser is a study in what happens when you do not have someone. I don't know if you've probably heard of this, that Roman emperors, or not Roman emperors, Roman generals would have, they were essentially ancient Roman taxi drivers who, on their victory marches through Rome with all the spoils of war and all the people they'd captured and blah, 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 there'd be someone, I think they're called augurs or something like that, not the ovens. They were people driving the carts who would whisper in their ear, "You are just a man. You are just a man," to keep them humble. Because even though they'd dominated the world, they were like, we have to stay ready, because if we get deluded, then we're going to lose it all. And the Romans understood that for a while anyway. But this guy is, I mean, to call yourself divinely appointed, it's not the fucking 12th century. You can't pull that shit in a modern world.
Yeah. So, after you get through the Industrial Revolution,
yeah,
and
that's gone.
Kind of like, nah.
we've already learned from Nietzsche that ship has sailed, you know. So you can't pull that shit anymore. I
do have an interesting question for you, though.
Go on.
So instead of King George, we've got Edward VIII, and we keep the Kaiser in here. He doesn't muck up the World War and piss off the Russians.
Oh, yeah.
The two of them, related and friendly.
Yes.
I mean, the anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim and all of that stuff's pretty bad, but
yeah, pretty bad. That
might never have had a giant Holocaust and horrible Second War.
Very true. Very true. And actually, at the time, around about this time, I'm trying to think, it would have been when the Kaiser was still quite young. England had a Jewish prime minister in Benjamin Disraeli. So, I don't know, would he have been before the Kaiser's time? Because I know that during the First World War, it was a Welsh prime minister, David Lloyd George, who was running the country. But yeah, there were two political giants. There was Gladstone and there was Disraeli, and they were kind of going up against each other. Disraeli was a rampant womanizer and gambler and stuff like that, but he was a very popular figure. So yeah, had that worked out differently, I actually think we probably would have had very cordial and very different relationships. It could even have come to a point where the European Union might have happened maybe 3/4 a century before it actually did. You know,
that would have been interesting.
That would have been incredibly interesting. And then you would have had, you know, you're talking about the Age of Empires as well, the development of science and arts, and this could have been a very different part of the world. So,
yes.
With that in mind, in terms of scoring, the Kaiser is, he is a tragic idiot, because he just needed someone to say, look, you aren't all that, even though his friends were doing it behind his back. So had he taken that on board and gone, oh, maybe I should be a bit more introspective, it might have been better. So with the Kaiser, I'm going to go an 85, I think.
Fair. That's a B. I'll take it.
We've got to go big with the Kaiser, because while there are mitigating factors in his favor, the fact that royals they were all fucking a bit mad, really. Yeah. So it's just his madness happened to tip over into the realm of extremism, nationalism, and war. So I think 85 is fair.
I do too.
If he were someone like Hitler, who had no links to royalty and no real kind of point where you could say, well, the weird isolation in absolute luxury and no connection with the outside world, that's why he was mad. Hitler had none of that. You know, Hitler had his own set of circumstances, but that's why Hitler would always score much higher than the Kaiser. But yeah, I think 85 is fair for the Kaiser, because he started a domino effect that went on until about 1989, really, when the Berlin Wall came down.
Yeah.
When the Soviet Union fell. So we're talking...
And it was all basically just because he wasn't paying attention
pretty much.
Like foreign policy and what the hell was happening.
I know. 100 years of European history, from him going into power in 1888 to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. All of that could have been very different had he been a slightly different person. But then again, we could say that about everything, you know. If the Mongols hadn't invaded Russia, would the Russians be so kind of angry about outsiders? You know, it's the whole thing. So you can say that about everyone. My guy is a little bit more low level in terms of historic idiots. In fact, I doubt many people outside of Netflix viewers in the UK or people who knew about the case in Ireland at the time will have heard the name or know the person that is Ian Bailey. Let me tell you the story of my idiot this week. Ian Bailey, the most suspicious man in history by his own doing. He made himself the most suspicious person in human history. So Sophie Toussaint Duplantier, who was previously known as Boniel, lived in Paris with her film producer husband, Daniel Toussaint Duplantier, and a son from her first marriage, Pierre-Louis Baudy Vigneault. That's a load of French words. There's going to be more. She had visited Ireland several times as a teenager and bought a house in the village of School. It's called Schull, School, something like that. It's pronounced in the county of Cork. Well, it's County Cork in southwestern Ireland, which is very isolated. If you ever, it reminds me a bit of North Wales. If you go to these parts of Celtic nations, there aren't straight motorways to get to anything. You have to go down winding A roads, if you're lucky, to get to these places, because the landscape is such that you can't really build a motorway. Like, it's not flat, it's not easy to dig into, it's volcanic, it's full of rocks, and it's undulating, and you know, there wasn't enough dynamite in the world to make a motorway for this. So West Cork, County Cork in Southwest Ireland is a very remote place, but it's also a place where a lot of the locals say people get blown into the area. So they will leave where they live from and they go to Southwest Ireland because it's like, it's got kind of this ethereal, magical thing. There's a lot of abandoned ancient castles there. There's a lot of really like thousands and thousands of years old, like Neolithic burial sites. And it's all very Skyrim, you know, it's very kind of Elder Scrolls. Yeah, kind of that sort of thing going on. And people are drawn to it, particularly artists, it seems. Journalists, artists, poets, writers, musicians, they all tend to go there because it's a wild landscape staring right out at the Atlantic, but it's also really romantic and very kind of Wuthering Heights, kind of Heathcliff kind of thing, very passionate and all that. And she was drawn there as a result of visiting there a number of times. 1993, she bought the cottage as a holiday retreat, and it's very basic. Like, they had electricity and they had running water, but there was no real heating. So it was a lot of like open fireplaces everywhere, and it's kind of like it was like the kitchen and living space was one room, wasn't massive, but it was kind of big, and then they had an upstairs and a couple of rooms, and I think there was a bathroom that was very basic in, and they probably had like an outside thing. It's kind of romantic, you know, and in the southwest of Ireland with the prevailing Atlantic winds, you'd have had to keep that fire stocked big time to keep that place warm. So very romantic, but very kind of rustic, very isolated, and very rural, and very
sounds like my kind of place.
It's cool until you find out what happened there. So she was a regular visitor with her son. Locals knew her, this is Sophie Toussaint Duplantier, by her maiden name. She didn't go by Toussaint Duplantier. She thought it was, I think apparently the rumor is it was too fancy, and she wanted to get away because her husband was a big deal in France. Like, he would go to all these premieres, and we're talking like big Hollywood names and big films, big productions. He was part of them, and she was kind of under the microscope in Paris, a bit like living in LA, you know, as a big name. So she tried to avoid that. Southwest Ireland's very remote, so she just wanted to be kind of hidden away from that. Okay. Sorry. She arrived alone in Ireland on the 20th of December 1996 with plans to return to Paris for Christmas. So she just wanted like a long weekend there, sort of thing. Toussaint de Plantier was found by her neighbour at 10 a.m. in a laneway beside her house, dressed in nightwear and boots. Her long john bottoms were caught on the barbed wire fence. Bloodstains were present on a gate, as well as a nearby piece of slate and a concrete block. Lot of blood on the concrete block. Her body was left outdoors until the arrival of the state pathologist, John Harbison, 28 hours later.
Wow, that's a hell of a response time.
That, I mean, I told you Southwest Island was isolated, but that's fucking ridiculous.
He walked there.
Yeah, this is worth noting as well. There's footage from this because the documentary's great. I highly recommend, before we get too deep into this, people go, if you can get onto Netflix UK, I don't know if you use a VPN or whatever, there's a documentary on there called Sophie, a Murder in West Cork. It is fucking fascinating. It's 3 parts. It's on Netflix, I think I said. It is one of the most amazing documentaries I've seen since what was it? The Tiger King. Dude.
Okay.
Yeah. It's that level of like, what the fuck is this? Totally shocking. So yeah, found her long johns. So when the state pathologist got there for 28 hours, and the reason I brought that up, there's footage from the local news at the time who filmed the comings and goings to the house. They covered up the body with a sheet. That's all they did to kind of preserve the scene. They didn't put like one of these tents over to preserve.
Hide it.
Didn't hide it. They just chucked a sheet over it. Meanwhile, every fucking police officer, journalist, local idiot has walked through the scene. They've kind of fucking smoked. They've trampled around in the mud for 28 hours.
That won't make it difficult to figure anything out at all.
That's kind of fucked, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the pathologist, when he got there, found lacerations and swelling of the brain, a fracture of the skull, and multiple blunt head injuries. This was a frenetic attack. This wasn't some calculated back of the head execution. This wasn't a stabbing in like the lower rib cage or anything like that. This was a frantic, merciless attack that was completely just emotion. It was full of emotion and anger and rage and just wild attack. The facial injuries were so severe that her neighbor, who'd known her for years, couldn't formally identify her because there was just nothing left of her face. Really, really bad. Now, here come the Garda. The Garda are the Irish police. It's spelt Gardai with a weird circumflex thing. Some people pronounce it Garda. Some people say Gardaí, Gardaí. I'm going to say Garda just for the sake of ease, because Irish, the Irish language, it's not the easiest thing to pronounce, even for a fellow Celt like me who speaks Welsh. This is a very different set of rules. So the Garda have been criticised for mishandling evidence, which we've already talked about. They fucking marched through the scene like they were a bloody band or something. Mishandling evidence, and were alleged to have coerced and intimidated witnesses. We'll get to that in a minute. But it's kind of weird, and I don't know which side of the fence I land on this, but anyway. The Garda Síochána ombudsman... don't even ask me.
You got way harder names.
Internal Affairs, let's say that. The Garda Internal Affairs Commission report concluded that while there was a lack of administration and management in the investigation, no shit, everyone's walking through the fucking scene, there was no evidence of high-level corruption. That doesn't say that there wasn't a high level of incompetence. That's a very different thing. So I've mentioned here, if you watch the documentary, it's basically they had no control over the scene. Fucking everything was happening there. Also, nobody wore any specialist gear, so they didn't put any like little booties on or any like kind of zip ups, so they didn't bleed DNA everywhere. They were just in their normal gear. So cross contamination.
Everything.
Yeah. And it was also, this is worth pointing out, mid to late 90s. This is still, especially in Ireland, very early days for DNA analysis and stuff like that. There wasn't much sophistication. So you basically needed a bucket of someone else's blood to get a DNA hit at this point. You needed all of their bodily fluids conveniently put in like little bags, a bit like in Seven, where the murderer's left like his fingerprints behind, and he's left like a bucket of like spit or whatever. You know, it's a bit weird. Anyway, now on to the main, and honestly, the only suspect in the crime. Ian Bailey was born in Manchester, England. He worked variously as a freelance journalist, sometimes published under the name Ian Bailey, which is the Irish version of Ian Bailey, because, of course, you're going to slightly change your name to fit in with your new neighbours. What the who does that?
A little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. And also worked as a fish farmer and had a market stall in Shul, the village, where he sold pizzas and poems, which I bet that was popular.
That's a hell of a combination.
Yeah, nah, you can keep your fucking poem, Wordsworth. I'll just have a margarita to go, please. Thank you very much. He moved to Ireland in 1991 and lived with his partner Jules Thomas in Shul from 1992 onwards. So around about the same time that Sophie Toussaint de Plantier bought this cottage. Bailey was known to the local Garda from previous incidents of domestic violence towards Jules, which had resulted in her hospitalization. It was brutal. In 2001, he was convicted of assault in Skibbereen District Court. That's much further down the line. When you look at this stuff, you're like, oh, domestic assault. It doesn't go into detail. The documentary does. He beat her mercilessly for years, and her child. So
he's established a pattern of being really passionate and punchy.
Punchy, aggressive. When you first see him in the documentary, you're like, he's a journalist. He's talking about like, oh, I was the first person who got the call, and I went down there, and the police were there, and you're like, oh, okay, here's the journalist talking. And then as the documentary goes on, the fingers start pointing at this dude, and he gets weirder and weirder and weirder as it happens. He is, well, anyway. So I'm just going to give you a condensed timeline of what happened in this case. The timeline isn't 100% accurate of like what happens because it kind of points the finger of blame at the Garda. But anyway, December 23rd, 1996, French film producer Sophie Toussaint de Plantier, 39, is found dead by neighbours outside her home near Tumor Shul, County Cork. January 11th, 1997, local shopkeeper Marie Farrell allegedly uses the name Fiona to make a confidential phone call to the Garda about a man she had seen at the Kyle Fadar Bridge, not far from the killing, at around 3 a.m. on December the 23rd, the night before. At the time of the sighting, she was with a man who was not her husband. Now, yeah. So the reason that a lot of people said she gave the name because she was with this guy, but apparently, like in this part of the world, there was no bus, so it wasn't uncommon for people to give lifts to each other if they knew each other. But like 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Also, it's not good. It's not mentioned here, but it's mentioned in the documentary. The person she saw was near naked and kind of howling at the fucking moon.
It was a werewolf.
Pretty much. A Mancunian werewolf, allegedly. But yeah, it's like the behavior. She was like, he looked and sounded drunk, even from the car. So pretty much out of his tree, acting weird. She thought the person was Ian Bailey, and we'll get to that in a minute. January 31st, 1997, a Garda superintendent allegedly tells Ian Bailey that he is going to place him at the Cailfada Bridge in the early hours of the morning. That, according to Ian Bailey, the superintendent in the case, basically, he denied it by saying, why the fuck would I tell a suspect what I was going to do in a murder case? I don't care how incompetent the Garda are. They're never going to say, I'm going to place you at the bridge at 3 a.m. Like, it's not fucking happening. Sorry, I don't believe that at all. Apparently he did interview him, and he was like, Ian Bailey's weird. That part I can believe, having heard what I've heard. January/February 1997, Marie Farrell is allegedly told that if she identifies the man on the bridge as Mr. Bailey, she won't have to give a statement. This is also denied by the police. I don't buy that for a second. February 10th, 1997, freelance journalist Ian Bailey is arrested on suspicion of murdering filmmaker Sophie Toussaint de Plantier. He is detained at Bandon Garda Station for 12 hours and is released without charge. January 27th, 1998, a year later, Ian Bailey, the prime suspect in the Toussaint de Plantier case, is arrested for a second time. Again, he is released without charge. The the people who do the charging in this, they were really reluctant to charge him, no matter what the Garda did. And with hindsight being the way it is, it's odd that they didn't want to charge him. I don't know why. They've never given a reason. They've always denied requests for a statement as to why they didn't charge this guy, but they just didn't. It's really odd because there's plenty of evidence, as we'll see.
He must have had some sort of pictures of them. That bring the
compromising circumstances
somewhere. Yeah.
You ordered a Hawaiian pizza from my stall. I've got the pictures.
It was the poetry that
they
were concerned about.
You wanted to listen to my poetry. Nobody else does. I've got the pictures, proof. Yes, you're going to get me off. And now we're jumping forward a bit here. April 2005, Marie Farrell allegedly phones Ian Bailey's solicitor, Frank Buttimer, and says, I want to tell the truth. She subsequently withdraws all statements she'd made to the Garda about the Duplantier investigation. February 2010, French authorities make a request for Ian Bailey's extradition on a European arrest warrant. October 25th, 2011, Ian Bailey's partner Jules sends a letter to the office of the DPP, these are the people that are supposed to charge cases in Ireland, which says, for the last 15 years we've been living in hell as the French authorities continue to investigate the murder, because at this point the Irish just can't charge him. So the French have taken over the investigation. November 2011, Solicitor Frank Buttimer is furnished with information from the DPP's office concerning pressure the Garda allegedly sought to put on the DPP and a state solicitor in the Bailey case. Basically, they wanted to charge him. That's not pressure. Right. That's like, why aren't you charging him? May 2012, Supreme Court rules that Ian Bailey will not be extradited to France to stand trial. He's not an Irish citizen, but they don't want to deport him, which is weird. Anyway, France has got a very weird justice system. They didn't mind that he wasn't going to be extradited because they just held a trial without him.
November. That's what you do, you know?
Yeah, we don't need you. We'll give you a trial in absentia. November the 4th, 2014, a jury is sworn in for, this is great, Ian Bailey's civil action for damages in the High Court against the Garda Commission and the state for allegedly wrongful arrest. So the case has died down at this point. No one cares. It's been years. And he decides to sue people to clear his name.
Not a good idea.
It's really not. You're poking the bear. As a result of this, the trial goes on for fucking ages, and so much other stuff comes out that it basically makes Ian Bailey look guilty as sin. Like stuff about his past, why he moved to Ireland, the assaults, him putting pressure on the woman to withdraw her statement to the Garda. All of this stuff comes out. His weird behavior, which we'll get to in a minute. All of this stuff, none of it would have happened if he hadn't decided to try and sue the police. As a result,
he... It ain't broke, don't fix it sort of situation.
Just leave it alone, you fucking idiot. March 30th, 2015, Ian Bailey loses his civil case for damages against the state and the Garda Commission. It related to the evidence of Schul shopkeeper Marie Farrell, who said detectives convinced her to give statements placing the former journalist on a bridge near the crime scene, which she retracted many years later. As the jury retired to consider their decision, they had two questions to answer. The first was whether the Garda conspired to implicate Ian Bailey in the murder of Toussaint de Plantier. The second was whether there was a Garda conspiracy to obtain false statements from Schul shopkeeper Marie Farrell that Ian Bailey had intimidated her. After about 2 hours of deliberation, which is nothing at all, really, the jury came back with the answers no on both counts. The Garda were fine. The Garda don't look great, but they don't look as bad as Ian Bailey. And also, there's an interesting development in this case. So, Marie Farrell was put under cross-examination and she was the only person that Ian Bailey had on his side. And she was going to come out and say, no, he's totally innocent. No, he's a great man, all this stuff. They put her on the stand, and they're like, look, what were you doing with another man in your car at 3 a.m. that wasn't your husband? And she was like, oh, I was giving him a lift. And they were like, okay, who was this man? And she was like, I'm not telling you. And they're like, no, that's not how this works. You are going to tell us. She gets up and walks out of the course.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. That's badass.
Kind of badass. Unfortunately, this isn't the WWE, and she's not Stone Cold Steve Austin. So the judge said, officers, can you go and grab that woman and bring her back in here, please, and remind her that if she does that again, she's going to be in contempt of court, she's going to have a €10,000 fine, and she's going to be held in the cells overnight. So you can't just walk out of court when you're on the stand. It's not how that works.
Would be nice if you could, though.
It would, yeah. Anyway, they brought her back in. She leaked that she eventually gave the name of the guy, and that was her credibility out the window because it was someone she was suspected of having an affair with. So, anyway, so the only person he had on his side was basically discredited. So, a psychiatrist report for the murder trial that was going on in France concluded that Ian Bailey. Sorry, I just want to point out we're moving on to sources that aren't influenced by Ian Bailey now. We're moving on to the people in the area around the case who, weren't influenced by the Garda or Ian Bailey. They are just the community in which this happened and who knew them both and knew Ian Bailey and stuff. A psychologist report prepared for the murder trial concluded that Ian Bailey had a personality constructed on narcissism, psychorigidity, violence, impulsiveness, egocentricity, with an intolerance to frustration and a great need for recognition. Under the liberating effects of alcohol, he had the tendency to become violent. What does that sound like to you?
Murderer.
Yeah.
Although I'm not 100% sure he's not a werewolf still.
Still could be a werewolf. A psychopath, but he could be a psychopathic werewolf.
Well, and I think that there's a certain degree of psychopathy that you have to have as a morphing being. Anyway, sorry.
And as a freelance journalist, that world will make you a lunatic. I know. Anyway, so after his failed libel case, the judge stated that Mr. Bailey is a man who likes a certain amount of notoriety, that he likes to perhaps be in the limelight, that he likes to be likes a bit of self-publicity. When you watch the documentary, if you do, you definitely get that sense because he spends ages of the documentary just walking around going, yeah, this is where I grow my beans. Beans have done really well. We've had a really good harvest this year. This is where I keep my potatoes. The potatoes have done really well. Actually, there was a moment when we were running it and everyone's like, you're on a documentary about being a murder suspect. What is wrong with you?
Odd thing to talk about at that time.
He takes him on a tour of his fucking garden. He's so weird. I swear to God.
He's on cribs.
He does. Let me show you my money room.
Murder documentary. This is my cribs. Come on in, y'all.
He totally is. It's an episode of Cribs, only with a serial killer, potentially, allegedly. This guy is very litigious, so I'm just going to say all of this, allegedly. Allegedly. Except for the bit in France. We'll get to that. Bailey denies knowing the victim. Some witnesses have contradicted this, and one witness, Martin Graham, has maintained that the Garda bribed him using cannabis to make a statement that Bailey previously knew Toussaint de Plantier. Another witness, Leo Bolger, had said that another witness, Leo Bolger, had the most sophisticated cannabis farm ever seen in West Cork. Did he have robots or some shit? It's growing weed. It's not that fucking hard.
Robot pot farmers. That's what's up.
Irish pot farmers. I wonder what that strains are like. And after making a statement linking Bailey to Toussaint de Plantier, had his sentence suspended when they found his pot farm. That being said, a load of other people who lived in the area were like, yeah, they hung out. Everyone hung out. Everyone talked. They met. Even Ian Bailey is seen on camera going, no, I never knew her. And then later on, he's like, yeah, I knew her a bit. We spoke a bit. And changes his story so fucking often, this guy. Bailey was informed of the murder at 1:40 p.m. by the Irish Examiner reporter Eddie Cassidy, who has since cut ties with this guy. He denies telling Bailey the woman was French, as he did not know this information at the stage. Several witnesses reported being told by Bailey before noon, so he wasn't told until 1:40 p.m. about the murder, but he's telling other people at noon or before noon that he was reporting on the murder of a French woman. How the fuck did he know that? Suspicious much?
I don't know. Is it? I was trying to think if there was some sort of telling physical attribute you'd be able to tell that she was French.
Yeah. I suddenly heard the dying notes of the French national anthem, and I just assumed that a French person had been killed. How do you know it was a woman? Higher pitch? Whoop. I don't know. And so, yeah, there's that. Several witnesses report being told by Bailey that before noon it was a French woman. Another 3 witnesses stated they were offered crime scene photos at about 11 a.m.
Oh,
before he was told by his paper, 1:40 p.m., that there had been a murder and to go down and write about it. He already had pictures.
Yeah. I've seen a horror movie with a crime scene photographer like that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. While under investigation, he continues to write newspaper articles. This is amazing. So he's under investigation for murder, and he's still writing for the Irish Examiner, which is fucking insane. He continues to write news articles alleging the victim had multiple male companions and steering suspicion for the murder away from West Cork towards Paris. What a dick! He actually pointed the finger at her then husband, who was like, oh, they were on the outs, and he knew about her affairs, and this was a professional hit. And like the police were saying, look, anyone who knows anything about crime, this was not professional. She was brutalized, and not in like a convincing hit fashion. There was evidence everywhere. If we hadn't fucked it up, you know. Exactly.
Not a typical hitman MO to beat somebody to death with a stone.
Yeah, they'd either make it look like a hit, so that like that sent a message to the family, like, get the fuck out of whatever it is you're doing, or they'd make it look like an accident or something gone wrong. You know, that's what hitmen do. So
maybe she fell on that rock that was over yonder a whole bunch of times.
Yeah.
Maybe that
maybe works. Maybe if her face wasn't completely fucking destroyed. Oh, Jesus.
She fell a lot.
Yeah. In the days following the murder, Bailey was noted to have multiple scratches on his forearms, as well as an injury to his forehead.
Told you he's a werewolf.
Yeah, it's the werewolf transformation. It'll do it for you. Anyone who's seen American Werewolf in London will tell you that shit is painful. He attributed these to, and this is my favourite excuse ever, to cutting down a Christmas tree on the morning of the 22nd. I was getting ready for Christmas, and I somehow got all of these injuries. It's a Christmas tree. It's not it's not Seymour from the Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah. Christmas tree. It's not like hell, a rose bush. I was pruning my roses would be a better.
That would be a much better excuse. Yeah. Or like my
soft.
Yeah, exactly. Investigators could not reproduce those injuries while cutting down trees, so they actually went out and cut down trees. The fucking Garda are amazing. Holy shit. Oh, yeah, well, we better go and try and recreate this. Let's cut down some Christmas trees. What the fuck?
Yep, nope, he's full of...
He's full of shit. I didn't get injured once. It's all soft and fluffy. Witnesses who were with him on the evening of the 22nd before the murder could not recall any injuries. How did they not charge this guy? Fuck.
Yeah, that's a lot of evidence right there.
We're not even getting to the half of it. Bailey and his partner, Jules Thomas, gave conflicting accounts of his whereabouts on the night of the murder. In their initial statements to the Garda, they both said that Bailey had been in bed all night long. Thomas subsequently retracted that account and said Bailey had gotten out of bed about an hour after they had gone to bed at 10 p.m. and returned at 9 a.m. He was gone the whole night.
Wow.
It's also worth noting, his partner, Jules Thomas, had a house that he stayed in with. Initially, when he moved there, he lived in what was called the studio, because she was an artist. The studio, which was actually a smaller, separate house, was like 100 yards down the road, and he used that to stay in and write his articles, but then they moved in together and they became a thing. He got up in the night and said, I have to write this article. And she didn't see him until 9 a.m. the next morning. That's major suspicious right there.
Yeah, well, better it came back with an article, damn it.
Well, yeah, no article, just a shitload of new injuries. Bailey himself changed his story to say that he got up at 4 a.m., wrote an article for about 30 minutes and returned to bed, even though Jules Thomas said that he didn't come back to bed until 9 a.m., so 5 hours after that. Plenty of time. Also, worth noting, Jules Thomas's place and the victim's place, less than half a mile apart.
Oh.
Yeah, down the road from each other.
Yeah, he killed her, allegedly.
A 14-year-old, Malachi Reed, said that 2 months after the killing, Bailey picked him up in the village because he needed a ride back, and he lived close to Bailey, and he got in the car and all that. And it was a very quiet journey. And then Bailey started talking. Bailey said that he smashed her brains in with a rock. Though Bailey disputes this, in 1998, while drinking at home with another couple after a night out, Bailey began talking to Richie Shelley about the killing and said, I did it, I went too far. Though Bailey again disputes this. These are different people saying he's confessed to the murder.
Yeah.
This fucking case. Not only did the Garda screw up at every I know. It's a fucking nightmare. So, I mean, obviously the Garda screwed up. Like, at every possible opportunity. Tons of evidence went missing, including the gate. The giant wrought iron gate that had blood on it, it went missing. How does a fucking gate... You don't lose a gate from a property store. That's...
Oops, I lost a gate.
I know.
Like a big-ass gate.
I'm kind of seeing now why he wasn't charged. It's like, can we really trust these people? They've lost a fucking gate. Can we really charge him? Because he'll get off on, like, evidence tampering or some stupid formality like that.
You start losing big items like that and, like, crucial key pieces, and you got to kind of wonder if maybe he was hanging out drinking with a friend in the Garda.
Maybe. And also, like, 28 hours for any forensic examination of the scene? What the fuck? Could they not have got a helicopter in? There are millions of empty fields in that part of Ireland. Get a helicopter, fly someone down, you're there in 2 hours. You know, at most. It's fucking insane.
Day and a half of sleep later.
Exactly. The property had bloody fingerprints on it. They lost all that. That went missing as well. The Garda's incompetence aside, I should also point out this. There was a trial held in France without Ian Bailey in absentia, and the French justice system is really kind of... I don't know if I agree with putting people on trial when they're not there. That doesn't feel like justice to me. Anyway, they did a really interesting thing. It was all kind of fronted by Sophie Toussaint de Plantier's son, who at this point is in his 30s, and he just wants justice. He wants to know what happened. They brought everyone over except Ian Bailey. They held a trial, and they basically found him guilty of culpable homicide in France. And a European arrest warrant is out for him. So the second he leaves Ireland, he's going over to a French prison to start a life sentence. So he has been found guilty in France. And he is super litigious. Like, he's even threatening to sue the documentary people who made this thing. I'm not willing to say that he's guilty of murder, but I will say that he is one of the most suspicious human beings I've ever seen, and possibly one of the biggest fucking idiots in human history. What do you think of Ian Bailey, the journalist, potential murderer?
He's something special. I mean, I think I'm going to give him extra points because he's a werewolf. So,
our first werewolf idiot. Amazing.
Yeah, there's no way he didn't have something to do with it.
I know.
And
let's just say something to do with it. But, like, who else? Like, there are literally no other suspects. It's the OJ situation. Like, when OJ was found not guilty, the police were like, we're closing the investigation. We've got no other suspects. You know? Right. What else are we going to do? So
this guy, he gets extra super creepy points too. So
yeah.
Let's see. The idiot parts of it is that he's wandering around telling people that he did it, and changing his story and just classic stupid.
Yeah. And then trying to sue the police to clear his name and because they got hold of his journals. all sorts of weird shit in his journal. So all this extra stuff came out.
That's the other big thing, is that he got past the sleeping guard dog and then he kicked it in the ass by suing it and brought it all back up.
What the hell?
I think that he's creepy and he's weird and he's scary.
Yeah.
But man,
the guard are really almost as idiotic as this guy for screwing this up.
Yeah, they get an 80 themselves. And then I'm going to give him a 78 just because he's smart enough to stay in Ireland.
Well, not even Ireland. The same village, the same house where this woman died. He is still there, serving up pizzas and poems every fucking weekend.
Okay, he gets extra points for having a pizza and poem thing. I forgot about that. Bad business combinations. Pizza and pasta, man. What are you doing?
Yeah, pizza and pasta. I would go for that any day of the week. But pizza and poems, if one of the prerequisites of buying a pizza is I have to listen to your poetry, I am never buying any food from you, sir.
No, that's just, yeah.
Oh, and apparently, sorry, something I didn't mention. In the documentary, they talk about his weird behavior. He would because he's a big dude. He's like 6'4". He always wore this and the big coat that he wore, this big kind of trench coat that he wore. People saw that all over the place, at the bridge when he was semi-naked. A few days later and stuff, this massive thing. He would wear that in the pub, and he'd sit in the corner of the local pub quietly, and then he'd get up in the middle of this packed pub, demand that everybody shut up while he read his poetry out loud. And it was like the worst gobbledygook bullshit poetry you could ever possibly hear. That is psychotic behavior in itself.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Extra points. I give Ian Bailey.
Yeah.
An 82.
Thank you. That's so cool. I sometimes when we do this show, sometimes you're a little bit stuck. You're like, oh, who should I do? Where do I look? Where can I find? And then sometimes something falls into your lap, like an Ian Bailey or a Malachi Love Robinson or the fucking the captain of the Costa Concordia or whatever it might be. You just find these people and you're like, how have you made it to adulthood without, Ian Bailey, to me, is at least, according to the psychologist report, he has a borderline personality disorder. That seems to be the assessment of the psychologist. He is in the line of suspicion. He's still in the exact same place. I don't know how he potentially got away with this. I think a lot of it has to do with the botched investigation and the fact that Ireland, for some reason, don't want to extradite someone who isn't Irish. So that's really weird. But yeah, thank you for the 82. Kind of an amazing week. So we've had Kaiser Wilhelm, one of the most notorious kind of, I guess people see him as a villain, but one of the most complex characters in human history, certainly in recent human history. And then you've got Ian Bailey, who, if he hadn't been so fucking weird and insane and probably stupid, nobody would have ever heard of him. I've heard of people, you hear of unsolved murders all the time. Even stuff like the Zodiac killings, there are suspects in that case, and but usually when they're unsolved, the murderers themselves are smart enough to cover their tracks. This guy was showing his tracks to the world, potentially, allegedly.
Look at these pictures I took of this murdered victim.
Oh, by the way, I'm not going to hear about this for another 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Wow.
Amazing.
He's a psychic journalist.
Yeah, isn't it incredible? A French woman's been murdered. How do you know she's French? And a woman. I was there. Oh no, I'll tell you that in 18 months when I'm drunk. Yeah. Jesus.
Wow.
So there we go. Ian Bailey, the most suspicious man in history, and Otto von Bismarck. No, sorry, not Otto von Bismarck. The Kaiser. How dare I bring Bismarck into this? He was a good guy. The Kaiser, history's kind of whipping boy to a certain extent, really. So that's our show for this week. Thank you all so much for joining us for these fascinating studies of human flaws and idiocy. And if you ever find yourself kind of maybe having an irrational need to start some sort of conflict by making a series of bad decisions, or if you have actually done something terrible and, through your own incompetence, decide to tell the world multiple times, maybe just stop and have a think about it. Although if you have done terrible things, please get help and get that sorted out. So that's our show for this week. Thank you all so much for joining us. Again, if you'd like to reach out to us, the places you can find us are on Instagram at History's Greatest Idiots and on Twitter at Greatest Idiots. And for now, that's me saying goodbye. Derek, would you like to say goodbye?
Been fun, everybody. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you soon. And everybody, take care. See you soon now. Bye.